Thank you and welcome to Special Use Permit Agritourism Utility Commission work session. Morning, Amy and John. You guys want to start off?
Morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Yeah, we intend to take a few broad brushstrokes today over some potential policy coming down the pike that we're going to have to take to the Planning Commission.
I have railroad ears.
Okay. We intend to take some broad brushstrokes over potential policy going to the Planning Commission. What we're looking for today is a congruence of opinion so that we can move forward with forming that policy. We don't intend to give you specific policy today, just the general direction that we intend to pursue. And those is the restructuring of the special use permit process. We're loading our presentation now. How we're going to do that, the intention to set up a tiering system, general length of time that SUPs would be good for based on their intensity of use, a general response to agritourism as it's been interpreted over the last year. We intend to clean that up and have a singular response across the board. There we go. And then the possible formation of a Utilities Commission for the purposes of looking at some specific items that have been outlined in the comp plan. The first element we're going to look at today is the SUP component. We've talked a number of times over the last year, how can we address SUPs? Well, SUPs really need to be in a tiered system versus a one-size-fits-all. We believe that a lot of the SUPs that are currently submitted could actually be moved to home occupation. We want to expand home occupation licenses, and I think we can reduce our total number of SUPs by at least 40%, at least by doing that. So that the SUPs that you have in front of you in the future, again, will be tiered and really relevant versus just having a carte blanche. You have an SUP, you can do this. So that's sort of the intention. You will see that we've got the definition from our comp plan, page 81 on this slide, with the proposed 4-element tiering system. The reason to tier, again, these uses are going to have varying effects on the adjoining property owners, and when they're more intensive, logically, the terms of use should be less. You may have a lot more requirements for more intensive use than you will have for one that's negligible. So that is the purpose to tier these up. Before I move on, does anybody have any question about that four-element tiering system?
So your large industrial developments would be the type 4, correct?
That's correct.
And that's where you would require them to pay for all of the engineering studies and road use studies and...
Well, again, keeping broad brushstrokes because the policy hasn't been formed. You're logically going to have a lot more criteria in a more intensive use than you will have in a less intensive use. So the additional requirements would be a component of that SUP as well as a shorter time frame than you would have in, say, a 1.
So before this policy would be adopted, you would have all that regulatory...
In general terms, but keep in mind that an SUP is special by nature, so each one is based on a case-by-case basis. What's applicable, one may not be applicable in the other. That is the nature of an SUP. But yes, anything that would be required for that specific site would be part of that SUP approval process.
So it's a subjective, you would subjectively be determining if it's graduating from type 3 to type 4 based on the type of...
To the next slide. So we'll give you a general process here, process element. We're going to identify the use in the land use table. That will determine the intensity and type of use. Then it's going to fall under one of those 4 tiers. That tier will determine the requirements and conditions of any permitting or SUP issuance. That's the intent. So identification, intensity of use, requirements.
What they're trying to accomplish, Commissioner, is that there is a process that applies to everyone, and so that there's no. You said discretionary. It's not discretionary. They will fall within one of those tiers based upon the testing they go through. Now, requirements once they are identified in those tiers may be unique depending upon the use. but the tier itself will be identified just via this step process.
Right. Once the application is received, we'll determine where it is in the land use table and then determine the tier.
I like it. I said from the beginning, you've got one size fits all on these SUPs, and it doesn't fit all, because you've got everything from one person that works from home online, no traffic, no customers showing up on site, all the way to somebody that's very intrusive to the neighborhood with lots of traffic and lots of noise. And the same SUP application is supposed to fit both. It doesn't make sense.
And John, you'd mentioned that it'd be a home occupation or home-based business license. Would that be a fee, I'm sure, and is that renewed every year if
No.
Just be a one-time setup fee and you're registered and that's it?
Yep.
Unless it changes.
And unless the policy changes down the road. It's my intent, once you have that home occupation business, you're good, unless your business changes.
That's what I was asking. Yeah.
Or the character of the business changes.
Or the character of the business changes that would warrant an SUP.
Yep, that's what I said.
But the intent
Okay.
here is not to issue SUPs for things that truly don't need SUPs, that really truly should be home occupations at a
That's a
rural
great
level.
idea.
Is
That's
it,
necessary.
John, would you put more, Amy, when you bring this back, I know you just got this right now broad and out in front. Would there be more information on when a person comes to do this that they could look at and say this falls underneath?
It is our intent to help those people, and yes, line those things out. We've already started to do that,
Okay,
and what a
okay,
home
I'm
occupation is,
Okay.
and see if their particular proposal matches or closely matches what we identify as a home occupation. Again, our intent is to find a way to allow those really non-intrusive businesses an avenue to pursue versus a generic SUP process.
Okay.
SUP process really should be something for, identified for something that's an intensive use that affects adjoining property owners.
So you said the licenses would only be one time. Would it be better to make it like a specified tier, like a certain number of years? So, because I'm sure some of these businesses will be defunct and will not be continuing to operate. And if you don't have a date certain when they have to renew, you're not even going to know. You're just going to have a list of these businesses that have signed up, and you're not going to know if it's current or not.
That is an excellent point, and one that we've thought about. However, that's a policy element. So when we get to the policy element, we will certainly have a proposal for you. Again, today is a broad brushstroke.
Okay,
with
so
the-
that's a decision
Right.
for later.
Yeah,
But you
policy
can't
is-
propose term limits on these.
No, not on that. But again, I'm sorry, you're talking about the SUPs. Yeah,
Yeah.
the SUPs, depending on type, these are general brackets. So what staff will do is we will recommend a term limit based on its intensity of use within the type of SUP that it is. Now, of course, it's just a staff recommendation. You, as a commission, can always override that. But we're going to give you our recommendation based on the use versus here's the max. Everybody gets the max. Well, there may be something about that SUP that, again, a more intensive use that warrants a smaller time frame, and we'll identify that in our report to you. So again, the idea here is that you get more information to make a more informed decision, and that you have some lateral mobility as to how many years you can issue an SUP for. So again, giving you more tools in the toolbox to make your decision.
I like it.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Over the last year, we've done some research over what we believe the state statutes say as it relates to agritourism. KSA 19290B are the definitive criteria in which agricultural uses are exempt from local zoning regulations. KSA 23203 defines what agricultural activity is, and I'll give you a minute to read through that. The state statute was amended in 2013 after the Kansas Agritourism Act was created, but agritourism was not added in any definition. To date, no Kansas Attorney General has made a determination for what exactly that agritourism is. The Kansas Agritourism Act, KSA 32-1430, and subsequent sections do not explicitly list agritourism uses as exempt from local zoning and land use regulations. There are three things that being registered does do for you. You can have registration with the Department of Tourism. It defines what agritourism businesses are, and more importantly, it allows for limited liability protection for the registered businesses, but it does not exempt you from local zoning requirements. So it is, from a staff's perspective, there are certain businesses that are absolutely exempted from local requirements, but other components that may be on the same site that are, say, event barns that we issue SUPs for in other areas, those are not exempted from the KSA. So it's our intent from a staff level to universally send a letter out to all those affected property owners saying an SUP is required for this specific section of the use. It is not protected under this KSA. As such, an SUP is required. Again, we have sporadic enforcement, things that happen in one that don't happen in the other. My intention here is to have a uniform enforcement. Whatever direction that goes, uniformly enforce across the entire county for those elements that are in that gray area.
That's a great goal, but can I ask you or legal staff, do we have the legal authority to exempt agritourism sites within Leavenworth County from property taxes?
You don't. The state law does.
State law does, and
yes.
So the exemption would come from
statute.
And the question is whether it fits in the right category.
And that's generally the prerogative of the Board of Tax Appeals.
So the following page, again, these are taken directly from the Department of Tourism websites, and you'll see where the arrows are annotated here. That specifically, you're not exempted from local regulation strictly by being an listed agritourism business. That's not the intent of the Act.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just interject one thing on this. John brings, this is an excellent presentation. Hopefully we'll be accepting this. However, I'd like to point out, when you read the statutes that deal with agritourism, it's pretty clear to me, by using the plain language that's in those statutes, that the real purpose was to provide liability protection to those agritourism operators who would allow the public to come in to observe and participate and enjoy agricultural activities. I'm talking about getting kicked by a horse, bitten by a cow, a corn stalk falls on you. It does provide liability protection to those property owners who do that. It also provides a tax credit for liability insurance up to a level. So the real purpose of the Agritourism Act is not to circumvent local land use control. It's to provide legal protections to those people who want to operate an agritourism business. And I would suggest that the touchstone for that is this. If the activity has no inherent risks and is peripheral to agricultural uses, I would suggest to you that Agritourism Act does not apply.
So just to reiterate what we've said, if for the county commissioners to be able to exempt agritourism sites in the county, we would need new statutory authority from the state legislature.
Well, again, commissioners, you don't exempt anything from property tax.
No, but if there was to be such an exemption, it would have to be provided for by law.
It should be clear statutory language doing so.
And that does not exist at this time.
No, and as John pointed out, there is no case law on agritourism. There are no Attorney General's opinions on agritourism. We do have some decisions from the Board of Tax Appeals that I think provide guidance, and that is that there may be a parcel of property, part of which is devoted to agricultural uses, which is exempt from local land use control and taxation, has taxation status. Well, on that same parcel, there can be activities that are not exempt under the definition of agricultural. For example, an event center that may host wedding venues. I believe the Board of Tax Appeals guidance is that is not exempt either with respect to the taxation classification or land use control. Whereas if I I'm the operator and you want to come to my goat ranch and pet the goats and see how I feed them and take care of them and slaughter them and process them, that's certainly agricultural and would fit under agritourism.
So if there was to be a change to give wider latitude to counties to exempt agritourism, that would have to come from a passage of a piece of legislation in Topeka in the state legislature.
And again, Commissioners, as a board, you do not deal with tax exempt status on any parcel. That's set by state statute, not by this body. However, it does fall into your appraiser's office has to deal with that, and your planning and zoning department has to determine whether or not it's an agricultural purpose, which is exempt from local land use control, or whether it is a use that falls within your powers of local land use control.
So like, for example, like we do the tornado relief, we make a decision to exempt. So if that was authorized in Topeka by the legislature, if they decided we were going to do agritourism that way, then they would have to pass a law in Topeka.
Do you realize how much land that could take off the tax rolls?
All I'm pointing out is that we don't have authority to do it.
Every farmer that does a seed plot and people
I'm not advocating for it.
Well, I'm just
saying
I mean,
that I just want to point out that it's not something under our power.
It's done at the state level, not
Right.
the county level.
right. Yeah, but I mean, just think about that, though. I mean, if you plant certain kinds of seed and they do a seed tour to see which seed done the best on your crops,
I
that's
understand.
tourism.
I completely hear what you're saying. I just wanted to point that out.
You see a lot more of those breed of seed signs down the road.
Yeah,
You can see a lot more of them.
right.
Yeah.
And then the seed company provides a tour, and then that's tourism.
Yeah, I get his point though. He's saying this is something the state does. The county can't do it.
And if they do it, it'd be an unfunded mandate.
Yep. Guarantee you.
And as
Once everybody's exempt from property tax,
Yeah.
then there's no more.
That's where they're headed,
Then,
I guess.
then where are we at?
close the doors.
Must be where they're headed.
Socialist.
Go ahead, John.
So again, just one final slide on this. This is taken from the Kansas Agritourism Manual. And what you'll find in that circled area is, again, the limitations to authority and stating that it's not exempt from the local regulation. You'll also see that in the highlighted portions. Again, taking from the state's agritourism manual. So again, our intention, and reiterated here, and one final slide in the highlighted area. Our intention, again, is to universally enforce that SUP component or that permitting component outside of what is determined to be an agricultural use, even if it's located on the same parcel. So that's our intended response. We understand that that may create some consternation across some areas of the county, but we wanted to inform you of what we intend to do and make sure that you agree with that. You agree with that process before we move forward. So with that, I would take any other questions that you have before we move on to the next section.
So one of the criticisms has been that we don't have a uniform system. We have different people being treated differently. You're trying to make that so that's not the case.
That is my intent. Yes, universally, we want to have a consistent enforcement process across the entire county.
John, there's a Northeast Kansas Agritourism Informational Meeting on February 29th in Holton. Is anybody from your staff going? Or?
We had not anticipated going at this point.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that we can't, but we
No,
can.
I'm going to try to attend. And I think Commissioner Stevens is going to try to make it also. So
We would certainly entertain the option of going on that. Yes, I think it'd be beneficial.
And I think whatever we can do as a commission to help aid agritourism, we want to do that.
Yeah, again, from a staff standpoint, we completely agree. We just are we intend to have universal enforcement, so there is no gaps in that across the entire county. That's the goal.
Kansas is an agriculture state.
That's right.
So.
Excellent. And again, moving in broad brushstrokes, this is a defined goal in our comprehensive plan. As you know, utilities are the biggest hurdle as it relates to development, either residential or commercial development. Clearly, there's some gaps in the line that we have here in Leavenworth County. The idea here is to put together a 5 to 7 person commission, a key stakeholder element, not just employees of the county, but people that have stake throughout the county, to identify resolutions to these particular items that you see, which is going to be wastewater alternatives, specifically in those growth areas. Typically, that's going to be, I would think, a high priority item. Rural water generically in the same areas. Electrical availability 3-phase specifically for commercial and industrial uses. You can't get those types of development unless you do have 3-phase, which you need to know what the planning for that is and where they currently exist. And lastly, high-speed internet accessibility. Now, staff doesn't have the answers for all of these. Again, the intent is to put together a commission that looks at these problems and offers solutions and then proposes something to you over a period of time. This would be, in essence, an ad hoc committee for a period of time until we get a direction. There's numerous references to the utility components throughout the comprehensive plan, and I would suspect in previous comprehensive plans those are identified as well. Again, key provision of the plan is to deal with those utilities as it relates to growth in Leavenworth County. Densities in specific areas are really not adequate for the adjoining jurisdictions, which ends up in sprawl. You eat up a lot of land with a small amount of houses. So these are just identifying problems that currently exist and utilizing a 5 to 7 person commission to provide you some options on these specific questions. And again, what we're looking for is, yes, pursue that. It is a goal of the comprehensive plan, and we will start doing that through the planning commission level before it gets to you.
I like the idea of doing it in-house instead of spending another $250,000 to contract it out.
We're going to do whatever we can in-house, but again, depending on workload. Any other questions on this before I wrap up?
Do you anticipate there being any additional cost to the county to initiate this?
Not to initiate it, but there may be studies that are a product that come out of this particular commission that they ask for, which I would bring back to the commission and, again, go through the budgetary process and try
Good starting point.
address
Would this
those.
be something we would need to fund within the budgetary process when we fund a line item for Utilities Commission?
Well, I don't anticipate that right off the bat. Again, forming the commission is a key element, but then we can identify where we may need to budget items, and then I will bring those to you during the regular budget process.
Okay.
You're just asking for consensus to make sure we want to put this commission together, which I think addresses some of the issues we address on a regular basis anyway, so I support it.
So if we have general support, we will pursue that through the planning commission level and have you have a more defined target as a product of their discussions as well.
I think so.
I personally don't want to commit to this yet. I just want to see more how it develops.
Well, that's all we're doing, Mike.
Yeah.
We're just saying let's just see what comes out of it.
Again, I'm not proposing a policy. I'm simply proposing that we look at this particular way of addressing these problems.
Let's brainstorm it and see what comes out of it.
Yep. And with that, that is the final slide of our work session, and I would entertain any questions you might have over any of the topics that we discussed.
Any questions from staff or the board? John or Amy?
Mr. Stephen does.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Surprise,
We've had a
surprise.
policy, we implemented a policy like 5 years ago of SUPs where there's no complaints, open-ended, we don't put a date certain on it. Are you suggesting changing that?
No, we would have to honor those. I don't think that there's any other way to address that, but any SUP that came after this would be subject to the tiered system.
Okay.
And I like the tiering system. I think that I disagreed with when we made the decision to open-end it to begin with, so I like
Just trying to
this.
save money.
I like this.
It's going in the right direction, yeah. I agree with you, Vicki.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this 4 years ago when we started, that one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
So I agree.
When we do an SUP and say somebody's using part of their property as their business, is that taxed any differently than just residential?
Commissioner, again, the state taxation system is exactly that. It's the state taxation system. Depending on the categories they create, a property's use determines what tax level it is calculated at. So the issuance of a special use permit does not in and of itself change anything, but if the special use permit results in a change of the use of the property, that would affect its tax status.
Okay.
You talking about, does the county appraiser break down?
Yes.
Yeah, they do. Usually they'll separate it out by home sites. If
Right.
they have a business on their property and a house, and maybe they have two houses, so they'll separate out 3 home sites, and one of the home sites they'll base all the valuation of the commercial business in.
Okay. You know, I mean, and like you said, the tier. Some of these are home-based businesses that are starting out, and they build their business, and they move on,
Yeah.
and get in and pay commercial taxes at a regular, you know, like I said, an industrial park or a commercial area.
So the SUP runs with the land. If we did a business license and somebody had say they had a auto repair facility and they sold it, does the license run with the land, or would they need to apply for a different license?
Typically, there's a time frame, both with an SUP and with a business license, in which the new owner has to register that they are now the owner of that business.
180 days.
Yeah, typically it's 180 days. We would, again, these are policy things that
Right.
we're not to yet, but our intention would have a window there. So yes, if you did sell the business, you had a period of time to register. If you didn't, then you would be subject to additional action. But again, that's generically how it is right now, and that would be a policy element that we would look at down the road.
And you're going to make recommendations on what the fee should be.
We will. Yeah, again, the intent here is to make it easier on the small business owner that truly it should be a home occupation and it should not have to go through the SUP process, making it less intrusive and decreasing the number of SUPs that you have to see that you probably shouldn't have to see. Again, I estimate that number at 40% at least.
Which is what we were trying to do with the extension of the deadline, but it didn't fit very well.
Yeah.
This is a much better idea.
Well,
And
I
our-
just want to make sure the fees
Yeah.
it is enough to cover everything, because I mean, taxpayers shouldn't be subsidizing somebody's
Yep, I agree.
business license.
Yeah.
And again, I've got to take this through the Planning Commission, but before I do that, I want to make sure that I have support here before I even begin that process.
Sounds good to
So
me.
Roll on, young man and young lady.
with that, I thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
One more question for you.
Oh, you already said
the
that.
license tier, you got tiers with the I mean, I guess it's a decision we would make, but you could tier the amount for the licenses.
Are you asking for
Depending
my
on the
philosophical
impact of the business or how small the business is. Correct.
I'm a proponent of a single fee for home occupation. I am not a proponent of multi-tiered fees for home occupations. I think if you were going to get into that, then they probably should be in an SUP anyway.
I was going to say, at
If
that
it's-
point in time,
If
If it's-
yeah,
Yeah.
then they're
Yeah.
needing to be in the business
Right.
category, not.
But again, those are policy choices that I haven't thought about yet. And again, the only reason I'm here today is just to get your permission to move forward.
Well, we're here to make you think.
I appreciate that.
Moving on up.
Anybody questions except for Mike?
I think that's it. Work session completed.
Thank you, Chair.
Very much.